Today we're going to look at a question that I would categorize as a medium level sentence correction question. It's not too difficult, although there's two sort of tricky things about it that I want to take a look at. As always, I had to redact portions of it because of copyright, so go ahead and click the link to the question on GMATClub in the description box and come back when you are ready. All right, so let's read A. Sunspots are visible on the surface of the sun, but have never been sighted on the sun's poles or equator. I actually did some of the work for us by getting rid of this non-essential modifier, which I knew was non-essential because it had commas around it. So it's much more clear to see the subject, sunspots, and its predicate verb are visible. So you might think, okay, well, because the predicate verb is the first thing underlined, maybe some of the answer choices are going to have subject-verb disagreement. That's always a good guess. But if we take a look, A says sunspots are, B sunspots are, C, D, and E all say sunspots appear. So all of those agree with the plural subject sunspot. So it's not going to be that easy. So they say sunspots are visible on the surface of the sun, but have never been sighted on the sun's poles or equator. So but is a incredibly important keyword on the GMAT that's a marker for parallelism. Usually when we have one noun and there's two actions that it's doing. So they're saying sunspots are visible, but they're saying sunspots have never been sighted because sunspots is doing both of those actions. It's being visible and it's also not something that's been sighted. Those two verbs should be parallel. So what we mean is that they're in the same verb form. So let's take a look. So are visible, that's happening in the present, but sunspots have never been sighted. Also, have never been, I guess we can get rid of never, it's not that important, but have been sighted, right? That is present perfect when we have in the sentence, so it's also occurring in the present. So even though this one says are and this one says have, because they're both operating in the present, that is perfectly parallel. So we like A, let's keep it for now. Let's take a look at B. Sunspots are visible, and I crossed off as dark spots, but for this one I'm going to read it. Sunspots are visible as dark spots that never have been sighted on the surface of the sun. Okay, well, if that's all I read, right, if I only focused on the underlined portion, I might say, that sounds fairly reasonable. Sunspots are visible as dark spots, and it's the dark spots that never have been sighted. Well, why can't that be the case? Problem is here, most students are going to forget about this non-underlined information at the end, and that is what's really important here. If I say that the dark spots that have never been sighted on the surface of the sun's poles or equator, suddenly you can hear that makes no sense. It's incredibly awkward and redundant the way it goes from surface of the sun's poles or equator. And because we can't just pretend that that portion isn't here, this is not going to be correct. Let's look at a couple different constructions. Sunspots appear on the surface of the sun, although never sighted at the sun's poles or equator, right? So here we use the word although, right, which isn't correct here, but let's pretend that you thought although was like but, and you're like, okay, well, I think it's supposed to be parallel, right? Well, if we just look at the verbs, appear is present and sighted is past. So that is not parallel. So just looking at those verbs could really give you a nice clue here. Let's look at what's going on in D. We have the although again, which again is wrong, which for complicated reasons we won't get into right now. Sunspots appear on the surface of the sun, although never having been, right? They appear, but then we have having been sighted. So having been sighted is a past participle form of a continuous tense. That's kind of complicated because having, it looks like it's in the present because it ends in ing, but because it says been sighted, that's why it's not correct. Again, this is going to be confusing for people because A also had been sighted, but the beginning part was have never been sighted, whereas this never having been sighted, it's not the same verb tense. That's kind of tricky. So I think potentially this question, if you're really struggling with some of these harder verb tenses, spending a little more time in the Manhattan Sentence Correction Verb chapter would be extremely helpful for you. which is, in my opinion, the best book on sentence correction. If we take a look at E, again, they have appear. Sunspots appear on the sun's surface. Appear as dark spots on the sun's surface, comma, which have never been cited. All right, so we have a which here. Which is a modifier, can only describe the phrase right before it. Here it makes it sound like the sun's surface have never been sighted on the sun's poles or equator, right? That doesn't work. Surface is singular, have is plural, doesn't work. You could also make the argument though that because of this preposition on, that it's actually supposed to be modifying this entire section, that dark spots on the sun's surface. But here, so then the meaning would be that the dark spots have never been sighted on the sun's poles or equator, right? But that's not what the sentence is saying. It says sunspots appear as dark spots, comma, which have never been sighted. So the meaning is really all about sunspots, not dark spots. So the meaning of this sentence does not make sense. So because of that, A, our original sentence, is the best of the bunch. I think the major takeaways here, the verb tenses are complicated. Don't worry if you found them a little confusing. I think the most important takeaways for B, it's the importance of always checking back in with the non-underlined information. And then for A, always looking out for a marker for parallelism like but, which is extremely common, and realizing that one of the reasons that A is the right answer is because it is extremely parallel. And that's what the GMAT absolutely loves.